Today was inspired by last week. And what happened last week is somewhat unexplainable. If you were here, you know what I'm talking about. But it was sort of funny because Pastor Cody, I knew he was preaching on worship. And then with what transpired last week, it was like, God's preaching this one for you. It was an awesome Sunday. It was an awesome day. But I don't know if y'all heard it or not, but when Pastor asked people to come forward if they needed healing in their body, over half the church responded. Then that inspired something in me because Cody said something. I don't know if anybody heard it other than me and Kristen and Hope. But I heard it, and it was loud in my spirit. And when everybody responded, Cody said, I thought I heard you. And I thought, that's my sermon next week. I thought I heard you. I want to talk about, I wish preachers would say, I think I heard from God. I think I heard from God. Now, I just wish preachers would say that. Now, here's my disclaimer. There's going to be a disclaimer here. All of us are in this together, y'all. So if I say some stuff about something you say a lot, or if you say God spoke to me a lot, this is not directed at you. So don't be offended by that. I just want to clarify some stuff. And if you're here and you're not offended, or if you're not familiar with Christian speak, then, you might learn some wonky things about Christians today. That'd be another good sermon title, wouldn't it? Wonky things about Christians. Michelle is an indecisive order of food. Tracy, you know this. You've been there many times. She never knows what she wants. She'll sit there and she'll sit there and she'll look and look and look, and the way the server will come over. Do you know what you want to order? No, give me a minute. So he leaves and he comes back. You know what you want? Just a few more minutes. And then she's going around, what'd you have? What'd you get? And then when he finally comes back, she says, what's better, this or this? Or what do you recommend? Now, my daughter Danielle, on the other hand, is a very decisive orderer of food. But she drives me crazy because she never stays on the menu. It's like, yeah, I'll take the 8-ounce ribeye, but instead of a baked potato, can I have mashed potatoes and, I don't know, Brussels sprouts? Just kidding. You'd never order Brussels sprouts. but this is, that kind of stuff. Sometimes people are so confident with their orders that it is disturbing. You'll find this at Starbucks. And they'll walk up to a Starbucks guy, I'd like a Venti half-calf triple shot caramel mocha soy, no foam, extra whip, extra hot, upside down caramel drizzle with 7 pumps of caramel syrup and 7 pumps of mocha syrup, double blended frappuccino. I got that off the internet. I've never ordered that. But people who are definitive in their ordering remind me of Christians that's so confident that God spoke to them. God spoke to me, told me not to take the job, stay where I'm at. And you're like, wow. And then your other friend comes up and says, hey, Dave, when your friend said God spoke to him, it's like, what do you mean by that? Like, do y'all hear God talk? Like, if you do, it's like, whoa. And I said, no, I don't think so. I'll follow up for Frank. But I think what he meant was I got a sense or an impression. But we don't say that. Now, preachers are famous for this. God spoke to me and said this. Well, I hear God said in so many sermons that I want to throw some caution out there today. God said is the 2 most powerful words that you can put together in a sentence. You agree? And I'm not against that. But if you say God said, then I hope he said that. And I'm just going to go on the record with everybody running around saying God said this and God said that we need to tell people what we mean. that I got a feeling that perhaps, maybe God possibly nudged me, or either say, I want to stay at the job I'm at. I'm not saying that we're not spiritual, and I'm not saying that God doesn't speak to us, because He does, but I'm concerned that if we run around and lightly use these two words together, that sometimes people can get hurt. And maybe we should change the way we say that to, I feel like God may be trying to say this. The old church used to say, I was impressed in my spirit. But that was a lot more helpful than God said. And when we say God said, it almost always means something other than an audible voice. So we need to clarify. Maybe we just need to change the way we say it to, pretty sure God said this. We might need to caution each other about this, because it's been used to manipulate people, and it's been used to control situations. Because if you say God said, what am I supposed to do with that? Michelle, God said for you to make me breakfast. I would never say that. I'm 54. I'm smarter than that. But I think it's imperative for our credibility that we be honest. If you say God said in Romans 3, well, that's different. Now, with that said, I do think that God speaks to us. But the Bible makes it clear that hearing from God is not a perfect practice, but it is a practice. The Bible makes it clear that we hear from God in part. And we also need to be mature enough that if we come out and say God said, that we got to be willing to double back. You remember when I said God said that? Well, God definitely didn't say that. When's the last time you ever heard somebody say that? When's the last time that happened? When is the last time somebody who loves Jesus and said God said something, I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but I'm saying it's a serious thing, and it's a weighty thing, and you can hurt a lot of people and yourself if you just throw it around. And I don't know when this happened, but somewhere along the way, it got to where whoever said God said the most is the most elite among us. But when's the last time somebody said, I walked it out, and some time passed by, and I have learned that God did not say that. He said He would speak to us. He said He would guide us. He said He would lead us. He said He would comfort us. But there's going to be days, y'all, that His leading is our thoughts, or His leading is our desires, or His leading is just something we thought God might have said. There was a place in Acts chapter 15. The early church, they came across a decision, and it was the biggest decision that they had ever made up to that point. And it was whether or not the Gentiles were going to have to adhere to Jewish customs. Were they going to have to be circumcised and keep all the other Jewish rules? And so the early church apostles came together, and they got to talking, and they prayed about it, and they talked, and this was a major decision. And at the end of the day, they said, no, there's just three things that we believe that you ought to do. But now there's a word that gets into the text, and it seemed. It means I got an impression. And check it out. In Acts 15 and verse 28, for it seemed good to the Holy Spirit and to us to lay no greater burden on you than these few requirements. You must abstain from eating food offered to idols, from consuming blood or the meat of strangled animals, and from sexual immorality. If you do this, you'll do well. Farewell. It seemed good to us. Even the disciples that walked with Jesus didn't say God said. They thought about it, they prayed about it, and it impressed upon their spirit. It seemed good to us. So we've got promises from God about his speaking, and we've got promises from God about his guidance. In John 16:13, Jesus said that when the Spirit of truth comes, he's going to guide you into all truth. He'll not speak on his own, but he'll tell you what he's heard. He'll tell you about the future. He'll bring me glory by telling you whatever he receives from me. All that belongs to the Father is mine. This is why I said the Spirit will tell you whatever he receives from me. Now, do you get the same idea that I do, that God is going to guide me and tell me things and guide my life in all things? And that sounds great. How? How's he going to do that? Because, you know, on Tuesday afternoon, how's he going to do that? On Tuesday afternoon, whenever you were told that day that your job no longer exists because there's a more technologically advanced way to do it, but we love you and we're glad you're here, so we're going to keep you in the company, except we're not going to give you the same job. We're going to give you a much lower job, so we're going to cut your pay like in half. But, you know, but have a great day. On Tuesday afternoon, how is God going to guide me? Jesus doesn't give an explanation. He just says he will. He will guide you. Don't you wish he would have put a little more detail in how he was going to do stuff? Hearing from God, I believe, is more about God than it is you. You know, we think that if we fast for 7 days and if we act a certain way and we do the right things, then we're going to hear from God. If we do we do A, B, C, and D and everything lines up, then we're going to hear from God. If God wants to speak to you, he's going to go on and do it. He's famous for that. Man, they're not listening, but we use the donkey. He spoke through animals. He spoke through clouds. He's spoken through all kinds of things. He even threatened to get rocks to cry out. He's good at talking to people. Michelle used to come up when we were real young, and she used to come up and say, I need to talk to you. I guess you know what I'm going to talk about. That's a peculiar person for a married man to be in, or a peculiar position. And if she said that now, I think I'd just tell her, I feel like that if I make an attempt to tell you what we're going to talk about and I'm not accurate, then things will not go well for me. So I'm just going to go ahead and tell you that I don't have a clue. when we were young, she'd say, you know what's bothering me? And I'd say, yeah, I do, but I want to hear you say it. It's our hope but we're kind of the same way about God. You know, God's not sitting there telling you, we need to talk. You know what I'm going to talk about? And you're like, my sins? I don't know. No, it's our hope that when we gather in this building, when we gather in this house, that God is going to speak to us. And we think it's up to us. But ultimately, it's up to him. He said he would guide us. And that's some confidence that we can use. God said that he would guide me. God said that he would protect me. God said that he would lead me. And I'm not going to worry so much about whether or not the thought or the impression that I just had is from God or not. Because if God wants to get a hold of me, God's going to get a hold of me. And he'll use friends, and he'll use circumstances, and he'll use whatever he needs to. He doesn't use confusion. And furthermore, God is the best at rerouting. I have a hard time with GPS. It's an ADD thing, I know, but you know, I don't pay attention to her. And I got one friend that don't like to be told what to do by a woman. And for real, he turns the sound down on GPS. but I just don't pay attention, you know, and I'll just keep on going and the thing's beeping and she's going nuts and I'm just in my own little world. It's just the ADD thing. And, but I'm always being rerouted. So do you think GPS has more grace than God does? He's great at rerouting. You made a bad decision? Don't worry about it. He'll reroute you. He's got you, boo. He's going to turn right around and he's going to come up and this is what I think. This is what I think. It's like God's got this. Just imagine on a erase board, one of those white erase board things, and He's got the plan for you, and then you mess that up, and God don't say, "Oh heck, Zoe messed up. She's history. You know, there's whatever happens now happens because I got nothing for her." No. He'll just erase the whole thing. Here's the next plan. And then you mess that up. He'll erase that. Here's the next plan. He's always got a plan for you. And you know, I think, I know you've seen it before where God's plan for you is like a straight line from point A to point B, but the way it really looks is, but you still get there. And so I want to give you some guidelines about hearing from God. But I want to base this on the fact that He's big, that He's faithful, and He's really good at talking to humans. There's a story about John the Baptist in Luke 7. And John's at the end of his life. He's about to be beheaded for preaching the gospel and a few other things. He made a king kind of pretty mad. And he's about to be beheaded. And in verse 19 of Luke 7, he sent them to the Lord asking Him, "Are you the Messiah that we've been expecting, or should we keep looking for someone else?" Now, much has been made of this passage. It's apparent to me that John's dealing with doubt, and he's dealing with fear. This is his cousin, and you know, he was there at Jesus' baptism. He did the baptism. He baptized Jesus all of his life. From before he was born up to this moment, he thought he heard from God that this was the Messiah, that Jesus was the one. And I spent my whole life preaching this gospel. I spent my whole life baptizing people and proclaiming, you know, that I must decrease and He must increase because He's the man. And now we're at the end of our life. And he was there when Jesus was baptized. He was standing right next to the dove. He heard the voice from heaven boom in his chest. He knows the prophecies. He knows the scriptures. He knows Mary. Do I really know what I think I know? And if I'm about to die for this, is what I think really true? And in a lot of faith communities, John the Baptist would have been in trouble. You doubt God? He's dealing with fear. He's dealing with doubt. But it's apparent to me in this scripture that we don't always know, especially during painful times, did I really hear from God? In verse 20, John's 2 disciples found Jesus and said to Him, "John the Baptist sent us to ask, are you the Messiah that we've been expecting, or should we keep looking for someone else?" At that very time, Jesus cured many people of their diseases, illnesses, and evil spirits, and He restored sight to many who were blind. And then He told John's disciples, go back to John and tell him what you've seen and heard. Now that's important, what you've seen and heard. The blind see, the lame walk, the dead are raised to life, and the good news is being preached to the poor. And then He added, God blesses those who don't fall away because of me. What's God saying to John? And I think in that we can find a guide to see if God's speaking to us. First of all, He said, go tell John what you've seen. Go tell him what you've seen. The first thing is look around at what God's doing. Look around at what God's doing around you. God speaks to not just individuals, but He speaks to groups of people. He speaks to countries. He made His own country. And so if the impression that you think that you're getting from God is inconsistent with what you know God is doing all around you, maybe you ought to shelf that one for a while and see how it plays out. Jesus also said to tell John what you've heard. So you listen to what He's already said. You get in the Word and you read, and if you think God's saying something, but you can't anywhere in the Scriptures find anything that even remotely resembles what you think He's saying, then maybe you ought to shelf that one too. Because if we're going to be bold enough to say that God said something, then we've got to be honest enough to weigh it against the Word. Because He'll never say anything that's contrary to His Word. He can't. Because that would be a lie, and God can't lie. Oh, by the way, the reason why God can't lie is because if He did lie, whatever He said would become truth. I always thought that was funny if you get to thinking about where all that could go. But even Dr. Phil says that the best indication of future behavior is past behavior. So look at what God's already done. Look at what He's done in the past. Read the Word and see what He says. But it was a strange way of answering John, with 6 ways that He was working. Number 1, He said the blind see. Number 2, the lame walk. 3, the lepers are cleansed. 4, the deaf hear. 5, the dead are raised. And 6, the gospel's preached to the poor. And this is a loaded statement, which is going to speak to the Jews. Third thing is, which leads us to the third thing, and that's to remember who He is. The Jews had taken the prophecies of the suffering Lamb and the conquering King that was, I don't know how many, how many prophecies were toward the, I've heard it, but I don't remember. A bunch of them, whole bunch of prophecies about Jesus. Now, some of them were about how He was going to be the conquering King, and some of them were about how He was going to be the suffering Lamb. Now, they rejected the suffering Lamb part. They only wanted the conquering King, and it was predicted that He would be both, but the Jews didn't care about that. They only wanted the conquering King. So Jesus answers John. He says, I am the conquering King, John, but I'm also the suffering Lamb that you didn't want me to be. See, when He comes as both, then He cares about people that they didn't want Him to care about. And I feel like sometimes we hear God from the office of conquering King or from the office of suffering Lamb, and God wants us to know that He's both. There's a whole movement based on the fact that He's coming out of the office of conquering King. I'm going to be blessed in the city, blessed in the field. I'm never going to get sick. I'm going to live in divine health. And there's another group over here that comes from the other office of suffering Lamb. Oh, it's bad. We get beat up and we're poor and we're going to stay poor because we want to be poor because it's somehow blessed if you're poor because Jesus said, blessed are the poor. and you know, you get two different whole movements coming out of both of these offices. One group talks about how blessed they are. The other group talks about how hard it is to get through life as a Christian. And never do the two get together. And God, I think, is telling us through His Word right here that I'm both, y'all. Jesus tells John these things. What about overthrowing the Romans? Oh, I'm the conquering King, John. But I'm also the suffering Lamb. And you can hear in John's request to what he was really saying, and most Bible scholars think so too, that he was also asking him if he's getting out of prison. Come get me. I'm your cousin. Help. I'm the conquering King, but I'm the suffering Lamb. Look at what I'm doing, John. I'm the suffering Lamb. I came to die, and you're going to die too. But make no mistake, I am the King. The disciples were in an upper room wondering, what happened to our conquering King? God wasn't what we wanted Him to be. And see, and a lot of times, whichever one of those offices that you want Him to be is the office which you hear the voice of God from, and that's it. God spoke to me and said, I'm going to be broken. Well, God spoke to me and said, I'm going to be blessed. Well, when's the last time Jesus bothered you? When's the last time Jesus crossed you with something in His Word and you said, I don't like that verse. I do not like that. That can't mean what it looks like it means. Somebody's going to explain this to me because I just don't believe that's what He meant. And based on our personality, we can get closed. Jesus is the conquering King to me, but He's also the suffering Lamb to me. He's both, and He can speak from both offices. And we need to be careful when the two get together for coffee. And somebody tells you what God's laid on His heart. And you say, that's not God. No, you're going to be blessed. See, there's been times when I thought God spoke to me, like the time I asked him if I could have a concrete company. And I, with all my heart, I think God told me that if you want it, I'll bless it. And then there was the morning right before my kidneys crashed when I told Michelle one morning, I said, I think God spoke to me last night. And she said, what'd he say? I said, just one word, joy. And, you know, I had no idea how blessed the business would be in the following years, and I had no idea how much my joy would be tested in the following weeks and months, as doctors told me that they thought I had cancer. It seems to me that I hear God a lot of times from my own personality, and I bet you do too. And I'm not trying to get anybody confused in here, but I'm saying in a multitude of counselors, there's safety. If you're not sure that what you're hearing is from God, then ask somebody. Maybe we need to get somebody to help us to try to figure out what God's saying to us. You ever felt something in your gut that you thought God might be saying to you, and you didn't want that to be God? It's like... I don't want to tell Cody, because if I do, he'll say, man, that sounds like God. I'm like, man, please. But I don't want to play games either. I don't want to make God in my image, because then I'm God. I want the lion and the lamb to speak to me. I want him to change me. I want to get better with age. I can relate to John. And if God's not working the way I want him to, or he's not doing the things that I want him to do, then I have a tendency in a way to look for another. That couldn't have been God. Maybe he's saying something else, and I'll keep looking for something else until I find something I like. John hears back from Jesus, and the Dave translation is, I'm not going to save you. Can anybody explain that? Can anybody explain why Jesus didn't save John the Baptist? That's your cousin. They gonna cut his head off. And that's the answer? See, some people in this room are, either you or someone you know is going through some really hard stuff right now. And we hear it every day. And it's heartbreaking. It's heart-wrenching, really, to know what the people in our own congregation and what their families are dealing with. But I promise you that in all this, God's working it together for good. He's working it all together for good. Now, that doesn't always mean it's going to be good for you. But he's working all things together for good for those that love him and are called according to his purpose. I think I heard from God. Y'all, you can come on up. I'm not trying to shake anybody's confidence, y'all. I'm just trying to insert some caution. I'm trying to insert some transparency. Insert some honesty. So that together we can experience the leadership and the guidance of God. So when we have these impressions, when we think God's saying something to us, and he may be. I'm certainly not saying that he's not, because I know God speaks. But when he does, just ask yourself, what's God doing around me? What's he already said? And remember who he is. That if he really wants to speak to me, he will. And he's going to confirm it. He said, in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, let every word be established. So if it's really God speaking, he's going to confirm what he said 2 or 3 times. You'll feel like God said something, and then I'll go to Michael one day, and he's going to say the same thing. I'm like, wow. And then I'll go to Cody, and he's going to say the same thing. I'm like, okay, I get it. There's some things that he told us to do. And then there's some things he kind of surprises us with. But you can be confident that what he started in you, he's going to finish. If he needs to speak to you, he will. Be confident in that. Stand to your feet.